Niselmilkom u nilqakom għal dan il-webinar dwar dan ix-xahar dwar il-migrazzjoni. Dan il-webinar huwa parti minn sensiela li qegħdin norganizzaw bħala newsbook.com.mt flimkien mal-Parlament Ewropew dwar bl-isfond tal-konferenza dwar il-futur tal-Ewropa. Din hija konferenza li qed issir qed titnieda mill-Parlament Ewropew mill-Unjoni Ewropea biex ikun hemm konsultazzjoni kemm jista' jkun wiesa' mal-pubbliku fl-Unjoni Ewropea biex dawn ikunu jistgħu jagħtu il-fehma tagħhom dwar kif jixtiequ jaraw illi l-Ewropa ser tiżviluppa fix-xhur u s-snin illi ġejjin. Hija eżerċizzju ta' sussidjarjetà jekk irridu ngħidulu hekk jew niddiskrivu hekk illi qed tniedi l-Unjoni Ewropea. Diversi huma suġġetti illi iddiskutejna diġà, kien hemm il-bidla fil-klima, kien hemm il-qasam tas-saħħa, il-qasam tas-saħħa kien wieħed vast, wieħed kbir, il-qasam tal-impjiegi u tal-ekonomija. Illum ser nitkellmu dwar il-qasam tal-immigrazzjoni. Aħna normalment nisimgħu dwar l-immigrazzjoni ħafna tiskanta meta tabda tagħmel ir-riċerka tiegħek nisimgħu fuq tip wieħed biss ta' immigrazzjoni, l-immigrazzjoni illegali. U għandha aspett umanitarju qawwi u huwa suġġett illi qajjem ħafna emozzjonijiet pożittivi u negattivi. Naturalment min iħoss dawn l-emozzjonijiet għalih huma pożittivi ma oġġettivament wieħed irid jgħid li hemm emozzjonijiet illi jagħmlulek ġieħ bħala bniedem u hemm emozzjonijiet illi ma jagħmlulekx ġieħ bħala bniedem. Però l-immigrazzjoni mhijiex biss l-immigrazzjoni illegali, hija wkoll il-migrazzjoni legali. Dik li anke l-Maltin għamlu u għamlu f'diversi perjodi tal-istorja ta' Malta. Minħabba li llum għandna għandna 3 mistednin li huma ta' nazzjonalità barranija, għall-ewwel darba f'karriera ta' 30 sena ser nagħmel programm nofsu bil-Malti u nofsu bl-Ingliż. Jien se nibda nitkellem bl-Ingliż u mbagħad nagħmel traduzzjoni bil-Malti, se nibda nitkellem bil-Malti u nagħmel traduzzjoni bl-Ingliż. Di qed ngħidha biex anke min ikun qiegħed isegwi ma jgħidx dax kien qed jużaw l-Ingliż fuq stazzjon li huwa bil-Malti, fuq portal li huwa bil-Malti. L-ewwel ħaġa il-portal huwa b'żewġ tilsna, għandek l-Ingliż u għandek il-Malti, però ir-raġuni hi li biex kulħadd jikkomunika jrid ikun hemm lingwa franka u mhux kulħadd ikun jista' jitkellem bl-istess ilsien. So I've just carried out a brief introduction about the Conference for the Future of Europe, a conference which is being carried out by the European Union, with the hope that the European Union consults in a subsidiarity format about what its citizens would like the Union to look like in the years and months to come. One of the subjects which is being discussed, we've discussed various subjects in the past few months. Today's subject is about migration. Migration is not simply the illegal kind, the one which is turning seas into graveyards. Boris Johnson recently referred to the English Channel as becoming a graveyard. We have been referring to the Mediterranean graveyard for a very long time. Even Pope Francis has made that remark. So to discuss migration, today we also have 3 people who do not speak Maltese. So for the purposes of this webinar, I shall be flitting between Maltese and English, trying to bridge gaps between discussions just to make sure that everyone is still on board. So we have with us today an observer from the European Union, Mr. David Stellini, somebody who's an employment expert, Mr. Gato Vella. Mr. Daniel Caruana Smith is a geographer, an academician, what on earth? Nello Scavo, who is a journalist from L'Avvenire, he is an internationally acclaimed journalist, worked with the New York Times at the moment, works with Avvenire, The Guardian, etc. Miss Leanda Keith, she is a British expat who has been living in Malta since her tender teens. And Mr. Usman Diko, who is the chairman of the Ivorian community in Malta. Mr. Scavo, Mr. Diko will be joining us a bit later on. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining this program. May I make it clear that you can answer, you can speak in whichever language you find most comfortable for you to speak. Do not feel obliged to speak in Maltese or in English. Either way, I will be translating. I'm going to start with you, Mr. Kawana Smith, as a geographer, as an academician. Normally, people put academicians in ivory towers. Geography is not an ivory tower subject. It's something which we touch and live with every day. What causes migration, Mr. Kawana Smith?
First of all, thanks for having me. Well, I think migration, one thing to remember is that migration has always been there. Ever since you had settlement formation, people have always moved to better conditions. Like you mentioned, it has, I think, recently gained a negative connotation with the Mediterranean so-called graveyard and with recent conflicts in Russia and Ukraine. But migration has always been there. It's not something that I think we can try and put in a negative light. It's something that can either have its negative effects mitigated or the positives, because there are positives to it, harnessed.
And what, yes, but the cause is as such. I mean, people leave their country. I mean, after all, your country of origin is always dear to you. Why do people choose to leave?
Well, people, I mean, I think it can be boiled down into either push factors, anything that would push a person out of a country, maybe unrest, lack of employment opportunities, better opportunities, or ideas of better opportunities in another area. Or it can be a pull factor. So people are attracted to, I don't know, climate, perhaps, even something simple as that. A language, which is more a lingua franca, something like that. So it's either something that will push you out of an area or pull you into somewhere which is more favorable.
Okay. Father Anton D'Amato heads the Migrants Commission. Now, the Migrants Commission has a long history. Today, we associate the Migrants Commission with work with illegal migrants, but its origin stems from another source, really. The Migrants Commission has helped Maltese migrants as well to go abroad to seek a different or a better future. What is the work of the Migrants Commission at present, Father D'Amato?
Hi, good morning and thanks for having me. Yes, the Migrants Commission, as you mentioned, started more than 50 years ago, probably just after the war had finished, after World War II, because there was a big influx, or rather than influx, big exiting of Maltese going abroad. Nowadays, our focus is more on assisting asylum seekers, migrants in general, and also refugees who find themselves in Malta and who would need some sort of assistance. We deal with assistance when it comes to social, psychosocial elements, educational elements. We offer assistance for people when it comes to accommodation, at least for a brief period of time, so that they can manage to gain their independence as quickly as possible. And also, in many ways, advocate, even within the church structures, especially a better understanding of what migration is. I would like to correct one word that has been used here. It's not actually illegal migration, it is irregular migration. So migration per se is never illegal, it's never a crime. It is irregular because there has been a rule which was broken or not adhered to. But it is important to make this highlight, because we are not speaking of people who are breaking the law or who are committing crimes, but we are speaking of people who are in need and who, for some reason or another, didn't get all the regulations ticked.
Quite right. One does not exclude that there will be people who do not deserve to be helped, but they are certainly not the majority in this case.
But that doesn't make
it doesn't make it illegal. You are quite right. It makes it irregular.
Trying to to go into a system for illicit purposes is bad. It's illegal. It's a crime.
In any case, yes.
Migration per se can never be illegal.
Yes. Ms. Keith, how long have you been living in Malta?
Hello there, thanks for having me. I've been in Malta for 15 years. I moved here in 2006 and I've been here ever since.
Okay, so you've studied here, you've lived here, your teenage years, I suppose?
Correct. I went to school here, secondary school. I continued my tertiary education here at University of Malta, and now I work here full time as well.
Okay, so what at the moment keeps you here? In the sense that when you came here, it wasn't your decision, it was your parents' decision, but now it's your decision to stay.
I followed my parents. My parents actually moved before me. They moved because of the pull factor that Mr. Caruana-Smith just mentioned. Because of the climate, because of the certain quality of life. It was very relaxed back then, more relaxed than it is so now, I would say. And then I shortly followed afterwards. I stayed obviously because of my education. I sort of fell into the University of Malta. I didn't really consider going elsewhere at the time. I stayed on. I got a job. I met a Maltese gentleman, and
as one does.
As one does. I bought a property as well, and I've remained here.
So, are you Maltese or British?
I am British. I don't have any Maltese in me at all.
Not even by inclination.
No.
No, not even by inclination. Right, Mr. Stellini, you're Maltese, Gotheton to be precise, and you live in the EU, so it's sort of the opposite experience of Miss Keith.
Yes.
We've imported her and exported you. I
actually came to live in Brussels 1 year after her. That was in 2007. So. Okay. Almost 14 years, I guess, but I spent 2 years also living in Malta.
So, for you, what was the push and the pull factor there?
Definitely, for me, it was my fascination with European politics, but also very good job conditions in working with the institutions. It doesn't necessarily mean that the people working with within the Belgian system.
Yes, I think we've just welcomed Mr. Dico. Go on, Mr. Stellini. Just a second, we've lost his voice. What is it? Okay,
hello?
You're supposed to be on now, okay.
Yeah, in my case, it's two things, basically. I was interested in the job and also favorable job conditions. But I have to say that since a very young age, I always wanted to work abroad. Not because I did not like Malta. I still love Malta and I really enjoy coming back to Malta. I love the Maltese. I really like the culture and everything, actually. But I wanted to live abroad. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to broaden sort of my horizons, you know. I wanted a broader outlook to life, kind of. It was an experience for me. It's still a very nice experience.
And this is, I'm going to ask you the opposite of what I asked Miss Keith. Do you feel any Flemish in you?
Flemish or French speaking, because here also German speaking, actually. It's so interesting because when you leave your country, and this is only normal and natural, you tend to start seeing your country and your culture from a distance. And ironically, the less you need your country, the more you love it. So this is why we hear of a lot of Maltese people living in Australia or in the US and Canada. And they would say that although they they live there for 40 or more years, they still miss Malta, and they feel actually more Maltese than the Maltese living on the Maltese island itself. So it's normal, and it's the nostalgic feel, nostalgia basically. I think it's the psychology of the human being, I guess.
So since we're talking about people who are, we're talking to people at the moment who are not living in their country of origin, we can talk to Mr. Diko, Mr. Usama Diko, who is the chairman of the Ivorian community in Malta. Mr. Diko, thank you for joining us. I see that you're traveling as well. How come you ended up in Malta, Mr. Diko? And you're muted. You need to put on your microphone.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am Diko Osman. I come from Ivory Coast. I am in Malta since 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Refugees.
Okay. And you came to Malta following which route? Through the Libyan route?
We are from the Libyan route.
Okay. We will be able to talk to you a bit more about your experience a bit later on. I think that we have online as well Mr. Gato Vella, who is an employment expert. Mr. Vella, are you there? No, apparently something has happened and Mr. Vella is not there. So let's start discussing a bit issues which are raised by migration. Migration is somebody who is attracted to a particular country, but that country has to share with the migrants all its resources, its employment, its the housing, its social services, whatever. How does migration affect things such as food supply? Mr. Caruana Smith.
Like anything, whenever you're increasing the population of an area, the infrastructure is going to be under stress. And Malta is a perfect example in the fact that we have a native population of about 500,000. After a healthy summer, let's say pre-COVID, it could swell to over 1 million. So it is all the infrastructure, be it transport routes, food supplies, it will be put under stress.
Okay. May I remind everyone that when you're not speaking, can you please put your microphone on silent, because background noise will tend to get caught on the camera. Just so that when you're speaking, you put it on, and when you're not speaking, you put it off. So Mr. Vella, I think has joined now. Am I correct, or is that Mr. Scavo? It's Mr. Vella. So Mr. Vella, Mr. Vella is an employment expert. When we look at migration, what sort of effect does migration have on the workforce? And you may put your microphone on.
Yes, certainly. It depends the way you look at it. If you are like Malta, in most cases, is on the receiving end. We had a large influx of third country nationals. And from an economic point of view, it has helped the economy grow. However, it did not help the economic structure, the wages grow. And it did not help the economy grow, but on the other side, Maltese workers' salaries did not improve, and there was a slowdown in the wages because the number of third country nationals imported to the island was too large for a small economy. However, there was the need. But this has to be rationalized. We have to have a long-term policy to ensure the number of third country nationals coming to the island.
Why do you attribute the lower salaries to third country nationals? Couldn't not
because
be instead?
Unfortunately, in Malta, not all employers are as good as one would expect. There are good employers and there are not so good employers.
Okay.
The good employers employ workers and give good salaries to their employees. But then there are not so good employers who treat third country nationals not so well.
Very poorly and treat their employees not so well. Okay, Mr. Dicko, do you come across this experience where people who have migrated to Malta for whatever reason are not treated fairly? Kindly unmute.
Yes. You know that in Malta here, like because I want to talk about we African people who came in Malta.
Yes.
Like we are refugees come by sea. To say that it was I think from 2008 to 2010, I was saying that many company, when you are working, you are doing the same job with all those people, like a Maltese and Italian, they was working the same company. We are doing the same job, but we don't have the same salary. Our salary was low, and then their salary was high. And when you complain, they say that you are from Africa. That we fixed this problem in 2008-5 to go. But now the situation start to change now. And now many people start to see that we are doing our work, we are doing hard work, and they're supposed not to pay us good like other people.
So you're starting to see a positive change?
Yeah, the positive change, that you start to change more because they are seeing our job now. They are seeing that we are, and in the job, we are doing our best now to do good job.
Okay.
And we are not saying that to go at work to go sit and sleep.
Ms. Keith, has this been your experience that you have done a similar job to a Maltese person and not being paid equally?
With me?
No, Ms. Keith.
Ms. Glover.
I wouldn't say so. However, years ago when I first moved to Malta, I think there was a little bit of, I won't say discrimination, but there was definitely a barrier between the Maltese and myself. I was actually the first foreign person at the school I was in at the time. It was actually in Gozo, Malta's sister island. So foreigners moving to Gozo back then it wasn't very popular. For the staff of the school, I think it was difficult for them to adapt themselves to having a foreign person in the classroom. And for them to speak English, it might have been difficult for them to change in that aspect.
Can I stop you there for a second? Would you, because Malta and Gozo's experience with foreigners certainly doesn't go back to 2006. We have a history of colonization, so we certainly know something about aliens. That doesn't mean you look like Shrek or anything like that. Might it not have been more of your perception rather than a reality, this barrier?
Possibly. I did feel a little bit, I mean, for me, it was a big change moving from the UK and coming to such a small island in the Mediterranean. I had to get used to a lot of things, a different culture, a different language, new friends. So it was a big change for me.
But then,
so it could have been a perception, yes.
But then over time, was this idea, perception of a barrier strengthened or weakened?
It was definitely strengthened. I mean, Malta's done a lot of great things for me. You know, it's given me a lot of opportunities. There are some issues still that do affect me. Perhaps we can talk about that a little bit later. But overall, I haven't had issues with regards to employment, being a foreigner here in Malta. No.
Okay. Mr. Stellini, the European Union is, on the one hand, a great promoter of movement of people through Schengen, but on the other hand, has been lamentably absent where irregular migration is concerned. To add insult to injury, in recent weeks with the unfortunate events in the Ukraine, and by using the word unfortunate, I feel very much a heel, because they're not simply unfortunate, they're dastardly. With whatever's happening in the Ukraine, we've also seen a discriminatory approach from the people who are arriving through the war in Ukraine to the people who are arriving through the ravages of Libya. How would you comment on that from an EU perspective?
Well, that's the broader geopolitical context there. Of course, the way the European Union is approaching the Ukraine war is totally different from the way it approached it in 2015, when a lot of migrants came from Syria through Greece up to the Balkans, to Germany, etc. That was 5,000 migrants every day crossing from the Greek islands to from the Turkish territory to the Greek islands. It was massive, and the EU couldn't even manage that because the proportions were so high. And politically, we've seen also that leaders like the former Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, suffering a lot because she said migrants are welcome, and she indeed welcomed these migrants. And politically, that didn't really serve her well, although eventually she managed to survive. Now, what's the difference between Ukraine and people coming from the Libyan route? The European Union, working in Brussels at the heart of the EU and the European Parliament, I can feel that this war, Ukraine feels for lack of a better word, for many people it feels personal here, because Ukraine is European territory, and for many people, especially from the Baltics, like Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia, or Poland, for example, these people coming from these Baltic states, they feel that if the Russian aggression in Ukraine is not stopped, it will continue to their countries, because they lived through these times of the Soviet Union. They want to avoid that. The memories for them is still very raw, and they see as the Russian aggression as something which could be out of control, really. So it's also about security. It's massively about security. Whereas people coming from Libya, so we're talking about mostly people coming from sub-Saharan Africa. For most people in Europe, that's a migration phenomenon, whereas the Ukraine issue is also largely a security issue also. It feels too close. It's very close. So I'm giving you the perspective of the feeling here, the heart of the EU.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're making a distinction here between the value of solidarity, which the European Union says it has, and its feelings of Europeanness as distinct from a globalized world, because when you look at distances, Mr. Caruana Smith will correct me on this, but I would believe that Syria is just as distant from Malta, for example, as the Crimea is and the Donbass is. So it's not a question of distance. I mean, we're not talking about here South Africa or China.
What I'm saying is that for most people here, migrants remain humans. This is so important, you know. This is absolutely important. Even
but do they, Mr. Stellini? Do they remain human for the European Union? Do they?
Yeah. They are humans, of course, and absolutely, no doubt about that. They feel also that in the when some leaders said in 2015, we welcome migrants. What happened also, this is just statistics, that a large number of those migrants crossing from Turkey were not from Syria. So the EU was ready to help Syrians because Syrians were actually in a very nasty civil war. So that was important for the EU to help people coming from that war. But it wasn't ready, and still it is not ready, even less so now, to attract people from Bangladesh, for example, or some other regions in some other parts of Pakistan, for example. It wasn't ready to attract low-skilled economic migrants. So that is where the EU wanted to put some control, because of course the EU has a right, and every country has a right, to manage migration. Migration, of course we're talking about people, but the states have a right to have an orderly migration, because it is the people who need that protection most, the international protection, as refugees most suffer when you have an uncontrolled migration like that of 2015. So that was largely uncontrolled. And then of course you start processing, states started processing migrants. They started understanding how many come from war-torn countries, how many come from economic misery, and then you start trying to plan return for those coming from safe countries, but it was just an economic choice. And then you don't manage to send them back because those countries don't accept them back. So this is the issue at the moment about irregular migration, because I like this word irregular, of course, because even though you come from a poor country, doesn't make you a criminal either, you know. But the EU is not ready. This is clear. The EU is not ready to accept. The EU is ready to accept economic migrants, but not without control. So the EU wants, actually, the EU needs economic migrants, because just to give you some facts, because this helps our discussion, it's the context of our discussion, the EU, and Gato knows this very well because we worked together also in the past, the EU is facing a huge challenge because of its aging population, and it is also facing another huge challenge because of shortages of certain skills. We're talking about ICT professionals, so information and communication technology professionals, engineers, high-skilled workers, even doctors and nurses. The EU needs those, you know, so the EU has policies for those. But in that case, it still remains a voluntary migration policy, where voluntary means that the national governments have the choice to decide, the discretion to decide how many of those migrants it needs. Whereas when you have a situation like the 2015 migration crisis because of Syria, there was all kinds of profiles, all kinds of people. They remain people, but you have all kinds of people. So then you have to manage that, okay? And what we're talking about is not just, the EU is not just a bureaucratic, you know, it is a political project. You know, it is democratic project. People vote for politicians to be elected as MEPs, but also the national governments. They need to contain and manage migration. Otherwise, they lose elections. So everything has to be done, yes, in a managed and gradual way. When it comes to Ukraine, for example, I'll just answer because I want to give the opportunity for others to speak also. When it comes to Ukraine, we notice that most of them, massively, almost all of them are actually women and children, because sorry, it's the light here. So most of the men remained in their country to fight for democracy, to fight for human rights, to fight for self-determination, to fight for the right to determine the direction of their country. They remain. It's a question of security. This is also they're saving their land, saving their lives. You see, this is not about people leaving their country for prosperity, for economic improvements in their lives.
I would like to take this opportunity because you mentioned the economic aspect. Now we have through this round of information, we have established the ground roots at the moment. I would like to remind everyone illi qegħdin nagħmlu dan il-programm bl-Ingliż anke għaliex għandna tlieta mill-parteċipanti illi huma illi jitkellmu biss bl-Ingliż, allura qiegħda għall-ewwel darba f'karriera ta' 30 sena qed nagħmel programm nofsu bil-Malti, nofsu bl-Ingliż jew iktar bl-Ingliż milli bil-Malti biex inkunu nistgħu kemm jista' jkun nifhmu lil xulxin aħjar u ħadd ma jħossu illi mhuwiex qiegħed isegwi. So Mr. Stellini has just spoken about economic migration. Mr. Vella, when you look at employment, you automatically think about also education. Now, Miss Keith earlier on said that it was her experience that she felt a bit like in a fishy bowl, so to speak. She felt a bit a center of attention when she went, and she had a lot of adaptations to do because obviously you've gone into a new country, or you're, as she described, a whole new life. A whole new life. How agile has the educational system been in Malta in adapting to helping migrants and helping migrants socialize and work?
In my opinion, there has been a very positive transformation on the island in the past years, particularly in the St. Paul's Bay School. There has been a very positive transformation. To my knowledge, if I'm not mistaken, there are about 15 to 20 different
nationalities, I believe.
Nationalities in one school, and that is very positive. Children coming from different nationalities coming together and trying to learn from and trying to understand cultures and trying to understand cultures in Malta. And that is very positive. Up to a couple of years ago, we tend to look, and unfortunately, even up to today, we tend to look at some nationalities with very cautiously. It's very sad. But then, at the very young, in schools, we have a different approach, and that is very positive. In my opinion, things are changing, but we need to change at a very rapid pace. We need to improve on that. But to have that, we need to have the educational system up and running, and we need to improve at the educational system and to improve the educational system. We don't need to have books. We need to improve the education by means that we need to understand the cultures in different countries and different parts of the world. Not only in the European Union, but people are people everywhere. People in other countries, they have different lifestyles, and irrespective of their lifestyle, they are people and they have needs, and irrespective of their culture. Unfortunately, in Malta, we still have, and it's very unfortunate, we still belittle and look down on people, colored people. It's very sad.
Okay.
It's very sad.
Mr.
Yes.
No, Mr. Caruana, I was going to go to Mr. Caruana Smith, who comes from a multicultural educational background. Mr. Caruana Smith also teaches in a school which has many cultures. We speak about different attitudes to different cultures. Is that evident among little children or not?
In our case, definitely. You can see the mixture of different cultures in my particular setting. You can tell the younger they are, we are in an age where they do not really, the culture doesn't make a difference. The older they are, I believe, as was already said, I think, yes, slowly but steadily things are changing. Obviously, it's going to take a while to change a culture, but we are getting there. Slowly but steadily, we've gone from schools having 1 or 2 foreign students to classes which now regularly have foreign students. So it's taking time, but I think we are getting there.
So it's in a way it's being phased out. We're sort of growing out of it, you're saying?
Slowly but steadily,
Slowly but steadily. Miss Keith, Mr. Vella has just said that Malta seems to have a bias against colored people. I will not ask this question of Mr. Dico yet. I'm going to ask it of you, because you are the antithesis to Maltese perception of what we in our minds think an immigrant looks like. And I am being biased and almost racist on purpose here, because I do believe that many people do make this distinction, an odious one nevertheless. In your case, do you think that this odious distinction applied to you or not?
This is a very sensitive subject to touch upon. However, I believe it's a mentality. I believe, particularly in Malta, from my experience, because I know everybody's had different experiences. I believe there is still a mentality that discriminates, regardless of colour, against foreigners.
Okay, that's important. So you don't think it's tied to colour, you think it's tied to non-Maltese?
Agreed, yes.
Okay, so how was this manifest in your case? Teachers froze up, you said, when they came to teach you, because you were the only...
yes, that was a language barrier thing.
Okay.
They probably weren't used to teaching in English, and they had to, because I, at the time, didn't understand a word of Maltese. Fortunately, now I do.
Okay. And not just the rude words, one hopes.
Not just the rude words, no.
Okay.
It has helped me get through school and even employment, and even certain other things, getting residence permits and little bits and bobs here and there too. One of the main issues I've had at the moment, and I still am having, is getting citizenship here in Malta. Like I said, I've been here for 15 years almost, and I'm at the point of almost giving up trying to become a citizen of Malta, because they make it very difficult for me. I won't go into the details, but it's yeah, like I said, it's a mentality. I won't tell you how many times I've been told to go back to my country.
Okay.
Yes. Like I said, I don't think it's a matter of colour.
Okay.
I think it's a mentality.
It's
a matter of culture.
It's a mentality. Mr. Stellini, you mentioned earlier on an issue about economic migration. In the early And after that, I would like to speak to Father Anton after yourself as well. In the early 1980s, Pope John Paul II, Saint John Paul II now, had warned. I remember it was one of the earliest times in which I remember something from the public sphere. It was sort of my entree into the public sphere at the time, and this stuck in my mind. This was the time of Live Aid. This was the time of the famine in Ethiopia, etc. And Saint John Paul had said at the time he was Pope that unless the world was going to help these countries find their feet economically, the world was going to face a huge migration crisis, which we are indeed facing today. Can the European Union, you said that the European Union has the right, and it does, to regulate migration, to regulate its own economic influx. Instead, can the European Union invest in countries to stop or stem the need for migration in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, well, if you look at, I mean, this is such a big question, even the one before it, the geopolitical question. There's certainly a lot of discussion in Brussels, and it's becoming more and more intensified. People consider it here more important now. The development question of, I think you're referring to the Africa continent, right?
The African continent was the one in focus when Pope John Paul had spoken at that point. Yeah. But obviously the principle can apply anywhere.
Well, for the European Union, Africa is, of course, a neighboring continent, but mostly, of course, the southern littoral part of the Mediterranean. So there are discussions here in Brussels about a Marshall Plan for Africa. We know that Europe, for example, was saved after the Second World War by the economic program called the Marshall Plan by the United States. That helped a lot to reconstruct Europe after the devastation of the Second World War. But that's not just it, I mean, it is very clear that the European Union and the European states improved their economic and social aspects of lives, because they pooled their resources, their coal and steel at the time. But then, of course, now we are at a stage where we're talking about the internal market. We have one single market here. So EU countries actually cooperate a lot. They cooperate, and they have a free internal market, a free market where you have movement of goods. Now we're talking about movement of services and capital and people. So it's not just the EU, it has to come from the African states also. So we're talking about regional development. It's very important that the EU does not deplete the African continent of its people, trying to attract the best and the bright from Africa to come to Europe. And we do that, if you look at especially the nurses sector, you attract a lot from Africa also. So we have to be careful, I think, in EU and Brussels, because we need a lot of people here. Just to give you an idea, in the next decade, I wrote it down here, the EU working population in the next decade is going to shrink by 18 million. At the moment, 1/5 of the EU population is 65 years or older, 1/5. So the EU really needs skilled workers. That's no doubt about it. But one aspect of this helping Africa is not to attract too many skilled people from Africa. One, the way we trade with Africa also. We cannot trade in a way that leaves a negative impact on Africa also. Okay. And then, of course, there's this Marshall Plan, this idea of giving a financial package for them. But the idea now is more, instead of giving them money, is about helping them, train them, do business with them, so that their economies thrive and survive.
Very good. I would like Father Anton to give me a reaction on this one as well.
Can I jump in, please, Ms. Debono?
Excuse me? Yes, of
Can
course.
I jump in, please?
Of course.
Just a point. Thank you, Mr. Salini, for mentioning that basically the concept of what is informally known as brain drain, where you are taking the professionals out of a region into another. It's one thing when it's helping, but as you mentioned very, very well, it can leave a country who has developed or deployed their resources to train people without a professional workforce. So I'm very pleased to hear that the EU is taking that into consideration. Thank you.
I think it's something which even Malta has experience of, because it's not the first time that we have had the best brains seeking work outside the country. Father D'Amato, from the aspect of the Migrants Commission, would this martial aid sort of package and trade agreements with Africa, with the various countries, 42 countries in Africa, help in assisting the people there, or is it a new form of colonialism and imperialism?
I think there is no yes and no answer to any question. This in particular, because it will depend with which formament this one goes there. Because if I come to you and say, listen, my dear, I have money for you, but then I will reduce you to my protege, my slave, you know, that would create definitely imperialism. This is something that, for example, China is already doing with many countries in Africa. This is something that many countries, big economies, are trying to do with their satellite countries. You know, I give you money, but then you have to give me something in return. I think the worst thing that Europe can do is to treat Africa as a continent that needs charity. Africa and Europe are completely different, culturally, mentally, the way we see things, the way we see democracy, the way we see nations, the way we see peoples, is a completely different. The worst thing that Europe would ask Africa, would ask African countries to think in a European way. That would create problems, because we see how things developed in Libya. We tried to create a European democratic situation in Libya, but obviously Libyan people work and govern in a different way. Yes. African people are not, strictly speaking, tied to a country, to a nation the way we see it. They are more linked to a tribe in the good sense, a people, a whole people, which most of the time is overarching regions, not geographical, cross. How to say?
Perhaps one of the things which the European Union needs.
Yes, regional development funds should be injected into Africa, but it's what the animus, the formament is, that you inject that money that will make it or not imperialism or something else.
Okay, to start on a note of closing up here, closing up the discussion, we've been talking about migration, and I would like to make a few I would like us all to make a few suggestions to the European Union as to what we think the European Union can do in this sector to improve situations. Now, bearing in mind both irregular migration and regular migration, we're talking about all sorts of movements people here. And I would like to take off from what Father Anton said, and perhaps I can ask him to go first on this one. But going from what you said, Father Anton, my reaction would be that perhaps the European Union should look to valuing other cultures and other forms of government as alternatives to its own, and not try perhaps to see democracy only from its own narrative. But I would like to hear what you would suggest that the European Union does.
I think.
Agreed?
Yes. One thing that the European Union should work towards in a more concerted effort, in a more concerted way, would be to harmonize legislation when it comes to movement of people within the EU who are not European. When it comes to employment, when it comes to benefits, when it comes to other things that we Europeans, we members of the European Union are given. I believe that more should be done to harmonize that. One of the biggest problems when it comes to employment here in Malta with regards to migrants, irregular migrants, and who would then be asylum seekers or would have some sort of permit, residence permit in other European countries, for example in Italy, that's what the biggest share of these people are, is that, for example, Malta doesn't allow that these work here legally in a formalized manner, and that obviously opens up a Pandora's box of illegalities. It's supplying basically the black market of employment, and that is something that the European Union should make sure it doesn't happen. Okay,
Mr. Vella, employment was called into question here. What would your suggestion or recommendation to the European Union
Definitely
be?
I share Father Margaret's comments. With regards to employment, it is imperative that the European Union should improve the conditions of employment and ensures that, as far as is reasonably practicable, the conditions of employment are streamlined and safeguarded to ensure that if in any case third country nationals arriving to the European Union are safeguarded. No one coming to the European Union should receive less conditions of work favorable than any European, any worker employed in the European Union. This has been happening, particularly in Malta. We have seen it on the island, and it's still happening, unfortunately. As has been said already, the European Union needs high-skilled workers. We need high-skilled workers, but unfortunately, we have been attracting low-skilled workers. The European Union needs high-skilled workers, but unfortunately, we are attracting low-skilled workers to improve, unfortunately, the economy of the European Union. In my opinion, the European Union should improve the economy with improved economy, not with low-skilled wages, but with improved wages.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ms. Keith, from your perspective as an expatriate, would be Maltese, but so far not successful.
There's been a lot of talk about attracting skilled workers into the country. That's all good and well, but from my experience, the system in which to get actual residency here, which you need to then work, to get a work permit and so on and so forth, it's very inefficient. It takes a very long time. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of documentation involved. There's always another piece of paper or always another document that is needed. So I would perhaps suggest a more centralized system in terms of documentation across Europe, which, you know, every country would have access to. That would be my suggestion.
Okay. Mr. Caruana-Smith, any ideas, any suggestions for the European Union?
Going off what Ms. Keek just mentioned now, I think as a measure, there's no hard and fast suggestion or solution to migration in general. But I think more of a focus on the population density, not just population, the density vis-a-vis the area, would also be a good indicator. It's one thing if your infrastructure is catering for a certain density. It's completely different if you have 3 times that amount of applicants. So I think knowing the population density is also going to help you in terms of infrastructure, be it physical, be it legal, be it social. That would be my suggestion.
Very good. And Mr. Stellini, to bring up everything together. I think we've lost Mr. Dico, actually.
Yeah. You know, I don't really have a lot of strong opinions. I tend to steer away from the emotional aspects of political subjects. What I like most about the EU is the democracy aspect. So the fact that actually politicians, MEPs and governments are elected by people. They are elected directly by people. And then they, for example, they agreed on the European Union Treaty, which says that it is the national governments who have primary competence on migration. So it doesn't mean that the EU doesn't do anything. It actually tries to do a lot, but the primary competence is the governments, the national governments decide exactly how many people they or it accepts in any particular circumstance or period of time. So I think that the European Union cannot act as much as it would like to sometimes, because there are legal impediments. I'm talking about Article, if I'm not mistaken, 79. I have it here written, Article 79. But having said that, in last September of 2021, the EU agreed upon the skills directive, which is called Blue Card Directive, where it opens further the possibilities and the conditions for skilled migrants. So it makes it easier for non-EU people to come and work in the EU, and it makes it easier for them to travel and work from country A, like for example Italy. Maybe a person would have worked 2 or 3 years there, and to come to Malta. So mobility within the EU. It makes it easier for family reunification. It makes some conditions for better salaries and better working conditions, and it makes it also easier for them to continue their studies. So the host country would, for example, acknowledge his previous certificates or degrees, and then the person would continue with their. So the EU is slowly but surely opening up more to people who want to live in the EU. But as we said, you have to be careful not to attract too many people from poor countries, because you want those countries to build their systems to become a fully fledged economy with the social policies ancillary to that, and ideally becoming stronger democracies, as our father Anton said. It's important that the EU does not impose on others our way of thinking, because every country has its own way of seeing democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen,
so
thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Stellini. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. I thank all the panel participants. Nirringrazzja lilkom ukoll li kontu qegħdin isseguna għall-ewwel darba fuq newsbook.com.mt diskussjoni webinar kompletament kważi bl-Ingliż anke minħabba li l-parteċipanti ta' dan il-webinar kienu ta' ilsna differenti u l-Ingliż kien il-lingwa franka bejnietom il-koll. Nista' nassigurakom li Newsbook ma nisihx il-Malti u il-webinar li jmiss ikun ukoll bil-Malti. Jiena nirringrazzjakom li kontu magħna u fisem il-konferenza tal-Futur tal-Ewropa nawguralkom li terġgħu tkunu magħna x-xahar id-dieħel meta jkollna diskussjoni oħra. Silvana De Bono sellilkom.